Just watch me now.
Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin. I am Jason Podolin, and today we have another amazing guest on the show, and his name is Trevor Letowski. Trevor is a 600-game NHL veteran for teams like the Vancouver Canucks, Phoenix Coyotes, Columbus Blue Jackets, and Carolina Hurricanes. He also spent some time in the KHL as well as the Swiss A-League, and before he got into his NHL career, he spent some time in the minors with the Springfield Falcons. So we cover all that, including his time in Sarnia with the Sarnia Sting of the OHL coming up through junior, his draft year. We cover his participation in the World Junior Championships, where he won a gold medal in 1997. And also his coaching career, when he's been behind the bench now in the OHL for 10 seasons. He's as a head coach or an assistant coach with Sarnia, now the very, very successful Windsor Spitfires. Trevor is in the midst of a really successful campaign. His team is ranked in the top 10 in the CHL. He is widely respected throughout the game as a great coach, as a great players coach, as somebody who's really embracing this new age coaching philosophy that seems to be taking over. And he was just an all-around amazing guy to talk to. Very, very, very generous with his time. He spoke to us at the Windsor Arena there after practice, and I really enjoyed this conversation. And for any of you out there, whether you're a parent or whether you're a player, Trevor offers a lot of insights about becoming a player, what it takes to be a player in today's game, and how he goes about trying to help players reach the best of their ability. So, without further ado, I will bring you my interview with Trevor Letowski. Well, here we have Trevor Letowski. Trev, Lutz, thanks so much for joining me. What an honor to have you on the line here. Going to start off with a little trivia for you, Lutz. I love, one of my favorite parts about doing this is like the background, little investigative work I get to do. So you were a 7th round pick of Phoenix, 174th overall. Went on to play 616 games as a 5'10", 170-pound centerman. At least that's what it said in the yearbook. And it was an accomplishment. But the trivia part of this whole thing is you are the second most games played out of anyone drafted from that position. So from anyone ever drafted, 174th overall in the NHL draft, you played the second most games of anyone who played.
Yeah.
4 guys ever to play 100 games from that spot. So huge testament for you to play 100 games.
That exact number, 174?
Yeah, 174.
Okay.
That exact number, 174. But there was one guy to play more than you, and you know him. And he was a Portland Pirate when you were in Springfield, and he went on to obviously an awesome career. Who do you think that guy is?
Jeez. He played in the American League when I was there?
Played in the American League when you were there. He was their top point guy. Next year, he had a little bit of a taste in the NHL, came down again for half a season, and then no one ever saw him again because he was in the show for 1,110 games.
Oh, man. Was he a Canadian guy?
First name, Andrew.
Burnett?
Yes. Isn't that wild?
I shouldn't have needed that hint, though. I should have got that one.
Isn't that, I was like laughing at that. Oh my God, those two guys, like what an interesting connection to have. But yeah, so he played 1,100 games, you played 616. There's only 8 guys ever from that draft position to have even played a game in the NHL. So we are going to get into that a little bit because I want to recognize that fact. I mean, you played in the 90s, you weren't a big guy, you weren't a high draft pick. Ended up getting there for a real long time. So I think that's really cool, and I want to touch on that. But I want to back up even a little bit more, Lutz. How did you end up in Sarnia? And if I got it right, you were a 17-year-old in Sarnia. Your first year, you didn't play as a 16-year-old? Okay. And so how did you end up there? Like, I know the draft, I don't think existed back then, at least in WHL, it didn't exist then. Was there an OHL draft when you went?
Yeah, there was a draft back then in the Ontario League. Yeah, it was Thunder Bay was a unique location though, because it was so far northwest in the province of Ontario. And most of the players that are older than me, if you look, that a lot of the guys that ended up playing pro did not play in the OHL. They actually took the U.S. college route. At the time, the Thunder Bay team had a team in the USHL, the Thunder Bay Flyers, which was a great program. It produced a lot of great players out of Thunder Bay. And the OHL was a little bit reluctant to draft players from Thunder Bay for that reason. They just wouldn't show up.
Right.
So my midget year, we had a good team. And we did real well. We didn't end up winning anything major, but we were one of the better teams in the province. And we ended up having about 8 guys drafted, and I think 6 of us ended up going to the OHL and actually playing. And to be honest, I think it's kind of started the wave of players kind of started to migrate out of Thunder Bay a little bit and going the major junior route instead of the NCAA route. But
right.
For me, as a small player who was a pretty good student, I kind of thought I was going to be a guy that played in the USHL, a Thunder Bay Flyer, and like Greg Johnson, for instance, was basically my idol growing up, and he's a player that was a legend in Thunder Bay, played for the Thunder Bay Flyers, went on to North Dakota, and a lot of people know what he did in his career and stuff like that. So it was a little bit outside of the box for me to go play in starting. I was drafted fairly late in the 8th round. They drafted us late. I should have been a little bit higher than that, but because they were worried about guys not showing up, we would slip in the draft a little bit.
Right. Yeah, no, fair enough. Let's touch on that just for a little bit, even that decision, because I remember myself played in Penticton for the Panthers. That was Paul Correa was there. I was 15 years old. And I mean, we have these dreams and these goals, and mine was to play in the NHL. It wasn't necessarily to get a college scholarship, right? And I was like, okay, quickest path. How do I get there? Where's my draft year going to be, right? All these things. I would have been like my 3rd year would have been in the BCJ, right? Like getting drafted out of there. And it just, to me, it didn't seem to make sense, right? I was a good student as well. My mom was really pro academia. And it was kind of a tough decision that I think is super unfair for a guy who's 15 or 16 years old to even have to make. But we won't even touch on that with those NCAA rules. But how did that go with you? Like how did you make that decision? Because like you said, in that day and age, we're talking a while ago now, right? Like smaller guys that had skill went to college, and bigger guys who had the quicker pace probably to or thought they did to the show would go major junior. And you opted out of that, like the funnel, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think it was one of those things where the guy that drafted me was the assistant general manager. He stayed in touch with me right after the draft until training camp. When I got drafted in the 8th round, it wasn't a big day for me, for our family. We were kind of, okay, maybe we'll go to training camp, but it wasn't like a dream to play in the OHL. That was for sure kind of similar to what you were saying. But it was that one, his name was Terry Dorn, actually. He's still in hockey. He's scouting for the Calgary Flames right now. But Terry kind of, he really liked me. He thought I could play on the team even coming out of the 8th round. So I went to Sarnia with an open mind. I had a good training camp, and things just went real quickly. I think that having my knowledge now, sitting here today and going through it, and what the odds were of me actually end up playing 600 games in NHL, like I probably, knowing what I know now, and I probably, if it's my son, he's probably not staying there, And I think at the time, and it's a big difference, the Canadian Hockey League now has come so far since the late 90s as far as what they provide their players with education packages.
Right.
On our team here in Windsor in the Ontario Hockey League, for every year of service, they get at least a full year's tuition and books. And that wasn't the case back then. I mean, depending on when you were drafted, like my education package was not good.
Yeah.
You could make an argument it's a lot tougher decision now than I would say it was back then. It ended up working out for me, but I saw so many players that made the mistake, and the education package was like 1/5 of a year of tuition or something like that. It was
right.
And guys would play a couple of games in the league and be shipped out, and they give up a full ride to a big school in the U.S. So
yeah.
It's a very tough decision especially back then, because there was so much at stake. Now I think you can't go wrong. If you can play in the Canadian Hockey League, it's a great option because you're kind of protected with that education package as it is today, but it wasn't like that.
Yeah. I agree. That's a big deal today because, as you know, I mean, I'm all about with what I do now. I know it's what you do. Like, we get paid to support dreams, essentially, right? Like, we want guys to reach their dreams, and the more that do it, the better job we're doing. And so I don't like being the guy who's like, you know, the odds of you doing this are, you know, minuscule. Like, who cares, right? Yeah, it's hard, but I mean, the thing is, the reality of it is, there is going to be an option when you got that degree, when then you can be the lawyer, you can be the doctor, you can be a great upstanding member of the community, either, you know, because you don't make it, or even post hockey, right? Everyone's got to do something after they're done, regardless of how much money you've made, right? There's something that you need to do something, you need to be of service. So, so having that university degree is great. And it's awesome now that these major junior guys are going to have that option, leaving major junior without a pro contract, wondering what to do. At least they can go to school. And I think that's a service that the OHL did, the WHL, the DQ did to these guys. Not necessarily any favorites from the NCAA, but again, those rules I think should change. But so you're 17, you go to Sarnia. Just by the way, a little footnote, I was roommates with Aaron Brand. I don't even remember that name. Yeah. So so you did play with him. I didn't check out the Sarnia database, but he had a good year there with you guys too. Had 100 points, I think, or something, and came and played with us in St. John. So Brando, if you ever hear this, good to see you again. So the Sarnia thing. So you have your 17-year-old year. You have not a bad year, which was your NHL draft year, correct? That was your first year to be eligible.
Yeah, back then, remember, you could opt in or opt out of the draft. It was a real strange few years there where you actually had an option. It was weird, yeah.
Interesting.
There wasn't a lot of players that opted out, but I was one of them. With my agent at the time, he just felt I was coming up, like my place on the team. I was going to be in a good position to put up some points in my next year, and so I actually opted out of that first year. I don't know if I would have been drafted anyways, but yeah, right. I just opted out, and then so now my draft year became the year after as an 18.
Awesome! What a brilliant move. That sounded great because you did. I mean, I think was it 99 points your draft year?
Yeah, so I had 99. Yeah.
Yeah, 99. I'm sure that didn't bother you at all, not to get to 100.
You know what? I got a quick funny story about that. I had 98 points going into the last game of the year. And of course, the coach wants to set you up to get to the 100. And I got an assist early in the game, and I was so excited. I had 99 points. I had about 55 minutes to play. So I think I'm going to get it, right? And then late in the first period, it was actually, I think it was Brian Berard. He was carrying a puck, and I went to go lift his stick, and I caught him, and it was a high sticking penalty. And I got kicked out of the game. It was
oh no!
Yeah, so I got booted.
So that's awful. So yeah, it wasn't even on you. That's funny. Well, since you went down that road, I'll tell you a funny story for me too. So my fourth year with the Chiefs, played there 16, 17, 18, 19, right? And so my last year there, I was chasing down, I think it was Pat Falloon's all-time career Chief goal-scoring record, right? So I was pretty hot at the end, and I was getting close, and I needed a hat trick to beat him, to tie him in the last game. We were playing Prince George, which was the doghouse of the league at that time, right? They were just no good. Actually, it was actually Victoria, but anyways, neither here nor there. And so, and like I had Babcock too at the time, right? So Babs was always about, like, he's still kind of that way now. He gets ridden for it. Like, he doesn't play Matthews enough, or he doesn't play Marner enough, right? Like, he just kind of was all about equality-ish, like, so me being my fourth year there, he never really played me a ton. I was first line power play, yeah, but it wasn't like I was out there all the time, right? I played probably 18, 20 minutes a game my last year, but that game, he played me like, I don't know, like probably 30 minutes. Felt like I was out there all the time. And the guys were trying to set me up. So I scored a goal first period. And then I just, like, this goalie was just standing on his head. We had 77 shots on goal. I had 28, Lutz. 28 in a junior game. And I got one goal. Yeah, I got one goal. So I finished one behind Falloon and never did catch it. But anyways, isn't that wild?
That's crazy.
So anyways, that's my wrap up there. But So yeah, so the draft year, how did you handle that now? I know now you got guys, you're handling that, and I want to get into that. Like, I want to talk about your career, and then we'll get into you now as a coach and handling guys that are, progression, projected to be top 10, and all the stuff that's surrounding that now that I don't think we really had to deal with at the time. Sure, there was the hockey news, and sure, Mackenzie was still talking about guys, but there wasn't the spotlight like there is now. Do you remember going through that draft year and like any of the challenges you faced or anything you had to deal with or go through?
Yeah, it was very challenging. It was probably the most adversity that I ever had as a player, I would say, because I had a really good year. I was an 18-year-old. I was the captain of that team, arguably the best player on the team. And the team was good too. We ended up losing in the second round, but we were probably good enough to win. We were a good team in the Ontario League, and so we ended up having it's either 6 or 7 players were drafted from the Sarnia Sting that year.
Wow.
I was actually the last player drafted.
Oh.
We had a first rounder, we had a second rounder, and we had a bunch of guys in between. So it was a really long day. It was one of those days, and everyone has their story with the draft, I'm sure. But for me, I was rated much higher than when I was drafted. I was rated, I think, 60th overall. Like, I don't know if that included the Europeans or not, but regardless, it was significantly higher than 174.
Right.
And I did my interviews. I didn't speak to every team, but a handful of teams. I had a good feeling. The draft was in St. Louis. The whole family went down there. And it was, to be honest, just a terrible day because it was all in the same day. It was a long day. It was near the end of the draft that I was picked. I think there was 9 rounds at the time, but still, it was still a long day. And yeah, a disappointing day to go 174. And I think it did spark me and it gave me motivation to kind of prove people wrong after that. So
yeah, no, good for you. So you're in the Don Cherry camp. He says if you're not a first rounder, you shouldn't go.
I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the draft. I won't get into that. I'll tell you that over a beer sometimes. But my draft story is kind of similar. It wasn't, and I guess it's perspective too, right? But I think it's all set around expectations, right? Like what you think is going to happen or what you're told is going to happen. And then if something doesn't happen, that's like that, and it's worse. Even though it's a great day because you were recognized as the top whatever hockey player in the world, and you have an opportunity to go on, you're still disappointed. You're an 18-year-old kid who had higher expectations, and I totally understand where you're coming from. So. But yeah, that 99 points. So you go on to get drafted. What was that conversation like with Phoenix at the time? Like what did they talk to you much? Did they let you know what they wanted from you or who they wanted you to become, or was it just the typical phone call?
No, they were pretty good. They seemed to it was a year where they only had, out of 9 rounds, I think they only had 6 picks, and I think they only had 2 or 3 forwards. Their first rounder that year was Danny Briere, who was obviously a great NHL player, but another small centerman. But I think I'm pretty sure we were the only 2 forwards that they drafted. I think that, maybe they're giving everybody love that because, for the most part, if they draft you, at least someone went to bat for you in the organization, but they seemed real happy to draft me, and they felt that I was capable of playing someday. And, they made me feel welcome and excited to be a part of that organization. So I knew it was going to be an uphill battle, no question, like getting drafted there, and especially
right.
the first training camp. Everyone that's been through that, it's just so eye-opening to see how much work how far away you truly are.
Right.
Here in Windsor with my players, even the guys that aren't drafted, guys get invites. I'm so excited for them to go through that experience because we try to tell them and what it takes to be professional and the habits it takes and the consistency and the relentlessness that it takes to play at that level. But until they actually see it, some of them it doesn't click in until they're actually around those players and they can see it and they come back like, geez, Lutz, you weren't kidding, And I'm like, no, what do you think? I'm lying or what? Like it's right. But I love that our players get those experiences. I feel every time they come back better.
Yeah, so that was your experience, like walking into camp. I don't know who was there at the time, probably Roenick, maybe Tocchet, or those guys were there, and you're like, holy smokes, right?
Yeah, you come in and you're used to being a top-end player. You're a player that's on the first power play and a go-to guy and getting on the ice all the time, and you think you're pretty good. You don't know any better. You don't know. until you see it, right? And then all of a sudden you see the talent of the third line player on the Coyotes that year, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not ready, and you got a long ways to go, and it's very eye-opening. At least it was for me, as far as I'm not even close to playing at this level at that age, and I wasn't. It was the truth. I was so far away. There was so much more development that needed to happen for me to play at that level.
Since you touched on it, I think that's an interesting point, because growing up, and there's a lot of guys that are following me right now, they're 14, 15 years old, and probably the best on their team, maybe the best in their organization. Everybody's a goal scorer, or that's what the best player on the team means at that age, right? That you score the most points, and so everyone identifies that as being a good player. But at some point, not everyone can be the best player on their team, especially in the NHL, right? So I think I've seen at least that, and I would like to have your opinion on this too. Like, sometimes guys don't like hockey unless they can play it the way they want to play it, and they're not willing to adapt. You know what I mean? So unless they are that guy, and I like hockey because I score goals, let's say, and now you're a third liner, and that's where you are right now or this year, and you have to do this real well to maybe have that chance. Guys aren't willing to do that. Do you find that the adaptability to be an issue sometimes?
Yeah, it is. I think that's the hardest thing, and I've seen it. I've been part of the World Junior team as a coach, and that's very interesting, because it's a perfect example for what we're talking about. You're getting players now they're playing at a high level. They're in the Canadian Hockey League. For the most part, every player on that World Junior team is the best player on their club team. But yet it's such a challenge for Hockey Canada to get a player to play well with only 10 or 12 minutes of ice. They're so used to being the top player. And I think that goes for every level you jump up. It just gets significantly harder, and it's almost an intangible that I almost consider that almost a skill. Like it comes from down deep, that passion to just to be good today, in the practice, and it just translates to the game. And all of a sudden, yeah, maybe you're getting your points or whatever, but you're continuing to get better. I think it's almost the key to becoming an NHL player. And to go off of your point, sometimes if you're the best player on the team doesn't mean that you can get to the next level, especially in the Canadian Hockey League. If you're the best player for the Windsor Spitfires, that does not mean you're going to play 1,000 games in the NHL. Like, you got to get going. You got to keep going and be relentless.
Yeah.
Improvement. And I tell young players all the time, like, I'm sure you played with them, Bob, like I played with a guy that was, when I was 15 or 14, he was literally the best player in Ontario. And by the time he was 17, he wasn't even good enough to play in the OHL.
Right.
He was literally the best player in the province. And you can fizzle out so quickly. I think the ability to push yourself to continue to get better, whether you're the best player on the team or wherever you are on the team, as long as, and I think you can attest to this, as you get older, it gets harder and harder to continue to push and to get better, and there's so many players that plateau. Some of them plateau at 15 years old, some of them plateau at 18, some of them don't plateau till 22, and usually that player that continues to get better till he's 22 is the player that ends up playing pro,
Yeah.
There's very rarely, at least in my experience coaching in this league, that, I mean, unless you're the top 5 pick in the Sidney Crosbys and the Connor McDavids, these players are 1 in a million, whatever. But if you're not a top 10 draft pick, like, you have so far to go. And that's, I try to tell my players, like, the kid, they get drafted now at 17. If you're not a first, second rounder, for the most part, you should have about a 5-year plan. You still got 5 years of development before you're going to play at the National Hockey League level, because most guys have got to play a year or two in the American League.
Yeah. And even those guys that make it got to keep thinking that they haven't arrived, right? As soon as you think you're arrived, you're done.
Exactly. It's so true. And I think that's the hardest thing to teach these players. I know we're going off a little bit with the coaching side, but it's just the players, they don't know. I find like they don't know how hard it is sometimes, and they have been the best player. And it's a little bit of an issue, I would say, in Canadian hockey nowadays, is these players are so young and they're getting agents at young ages, and there's so much development and so much cost. And I think that's a huge issue in Canada now, to be an elite player at a younger age. I think when me and you were coming up, we played AAA hockey, and then we played baseball in the summer. And, it wasn't such a commitment from the whole family. And now
Yeah.
I feel that's a big issue. At least it is in Ontario and in the GTA. The kids coming out of there, if you want to be elite, you're going to all this extra stuff for hockey in the off season, skill development stuff and stick handling. And there's so much built into it. And sometimes they get a little adversity and they can't handle that when they get into higher levels like the OHL.
I hear you. And I think the interesting thing is like what you're talking about there. And I know we are going off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's all right. We can do what we want. Like the skills that aren't getting to, like how about on ice skills of like, I mean, we just talked about it. So even you went through it, I went through it. I was the best player on my AHL team, professional team. I shouldn't say best player. Lonnie Mahonis there was some other really good players there, but I had the most goals on that team that year. Let's say that, right?
Yeah.
But then you get your chance in the NHL, and that's not my role in the NHL as a right winger there to go score 40 in the NHL when I first get called up playing 10 minutes a game. My role is to get the puck off the wall and get it out of the zone and maybe go hit somebody on the forecheck and get the hell off the ice, right? And if I haven't adapted my brain to knowing how to do that or even really knowing how to do that well, right? Like I am now not really giving myself the opportunity to do what I do best at that next level, right? So I think that's like that connection too, right? Is like not everybody's going to play in the power play, right? So how are you going to get the opportunity to play in the power play? You got to be good at something else, right?
Yeah, it's so true. I think it's a little bit different now, I would say, because when we came up, it was very, you knew your role. There was that fourth line player that only played 8 minutes, and that guy had to be a tough guy or a guy that could win a face-off or could kill a penalty. And the third line guy had to be an energy guy and kind of a pest kind of guy. And then the top two line guys were expected to score. I think the game is changing, I think, in the right way now.
Yeah.
Whereas most players, and it's kind of the World Junior model now for Canada, where they want everyone to provide skill and everyone can score. Everyone's not going to play 20 minutes, of course, but at least you don't have to just defend if you're a third line. You're not like the third line checker is kind of leaving the game, I would say. Whereas when we were coming through, you needed to do that or else you're not playing at all.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different and it's a good thing.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because even you saying that, and this will be another tangent, but I find that the defensive side of the puck is not nearly as good as it used to be. Like watching in games, even at the NHL level, like D-zone coverage to me blows my mind. Like everyone's watching the puck, and there's guys. It's just like I just don't even get it anymore. But maybe that's part of it too, right? Everyone's just been so taught that, for so long that it's about skill and it's about skill and it's about skill and individual skill and moving the puck, and like there's not much time left for coaching. How much time do you spend on D-zone and coaching that aspect of the game, that side of the puck?
Well, we do, like we're getting away from structure a little bit, and we're just teaching like concepts and habits and basically habits as far as on the defensive side of the puck. So not so much like a concrete system of like a 1-2-2 even on a neutral zone or something, but we teach like cutting routes and being on top of pucks and providing puck pressure if you're the closest guy to the puck. If not, you're kind of falling in underneath it and you're on top of the puck. And we were teaching every day like the habits of how to check about stick on puck, and if you're inside position, getting under the hands and things like that.
Yeah.
I feel like that it works, like if you have one player providing puck pressure and everyone else is on the D side of the puck, then you got a good opportunity to kind of disrupt something and create a loose puck and then transition it and go play on offense,
Yeah.
So the game is certainly less structured, I agree, but there's so much, it's played so differently offensively now with, it's basically almost like a five-man rotation of creating offense, where it's
right.
he's standing at the blue line, offensive zone, low to high, D to D, get a shot down. Now those players are kind of interchangeable and so active, and it causes a lot of confusion.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. There really is. That aspect is fun to watch. So let's get back to your last year there. You have another real strong year, and you talk about World Junior. You talk about your World Junior experience as a coach, but you had it as a player too. And you also talked about Danny Briere, which is so coincidental because I've interviewed him on this podcast as well. And so we'll talk about your experience with Danny. But how was that whole part of being Canada's national team and experiencing what that was all about? I feel like there's like a fraternity of us that have had the pleasure and the honor of being able to do that. And you guys won gold too. I think it was the 5th gold medal in a row that you guys were a part of, correct?
Correct. Yes. And
Yeah.
you were the one before?
Yeah, I was one before. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, it's honestly, it's like a highlight of my life, when you're able to win a championship with a group like that. And Hockey Canada does such a great job of bringing you together. People that haven't been through it, it's hard to understand how close you truly become, in that month. You have a few weeks in the summer and then the month together at Christmas. And those relationships I still have to this day, and I'm sure you do too, with the guys that you play with, right? And
yeah, I know, 100%. It's a real galvanizing thing, right? I mean, it's crazy going through it, to come out on the right end of the stick, and to be able to have that gold medal, which is sitting right here behind me on this wall, is pretty special. And again, I mean, I had a shorter career than you did, but I mean, I've talked to a lot of guys that have gone through that, and it's like, it's tough to surpass it unless you've won like an Olympics or like a Stanley Cup. It's like it's one of the top things that a guy's ever done, right?
No question about it. I've shared that with my players. I would say, like, I have two of my best memories in hockey. That is one of them. My other one is my first NHL game, just what I shared with my family, and that I'll never forget that moment. It was basically not even on the ice, but just the phone call home. It's just there's so much that went into that phone call. So for me, it's my first NHL game, and that World Junior Gold Medal trumps almost any memory I have from the National Hockey League, those 600 games, because we won, and I think that championship feeling that it's something that you never forget. It's so pure, and especially at that level, there's no money, but it just means so much, and it's down to the soul,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Super cool. Any memories of Babs then? Meaning Mike Babcock. I know he was your head coach there for that one. I think Brad Larson, geez, what a weird connection, because he was another guy I've interviewed now, assistant coach for the Blue Jackets. So he was on your team there as well. I think I'm going to get the whole entire 1997 team there before we're all done. But what are your memories of Babs? Anything that sticks out, or do you think he was going to be going on destined for the career that he's had as a head coach?
Yeah, you felt it. There's a presence to Babs. I mean, do you know him? I mean,
I played for him in Spokane, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm sure you can attest to it. But there's a presence to Babs. There's an intensity to him, kind of all the time. That he's bringing so much energy into the room. He was a young guy at the time. I'm pretty sure he was in his 30s still, maybe even mid 30s. And to have that position, he came in and. I remember thinking I had never been coached like that before. He was a special guy. You kind of felt it. You knew that he was going to be a great coach at the next level for sure.
Right. Cool. And now, because you are sitting in that coach's chair right now in the Windsor Spitfire locker room, did you ever have that inclination? Like, were you a guy that would pick up and kind of think about that aspect of the game? Would it be like on the other side of the bench at that time, or was that for later years?
That was for later years, yeah. I didn't really think about it too much. I always liked helping like hockey schools and things like that. I always liked speaking to kids, that aspect of the coaching thing. So when I got later in my pro career, it started to kind of sneak in, and that I might make a decent coach. I think the type of player I was also kind of helped me. I was always a guy that had to find ways. Kind of very detailed player, I would say. I had to be coachable, especially at the NHL level, just to survive. For
right.
I had to be pretty detailed in my routes and my positioning and things like that. So I was always, I certainly was a structured player, I would say.
Yeah, no, interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that, because that's a total mindset thing there too, right? It's that adaptability, like it's finding a way, right? Like figuring out how to survive. And you mentioned the word coachability, which is something my wife and I just talked about. She's a dance teacher the other day, and it's a really interesting word. And I think it is a skill as well, to be able, as a player, right, to not be talking in your brain while someone's talking to you, right? Or not trying to find the excuse, trying to find, how this person is really trying to help me. And then not only listening, but being able to implement it is like such an interesting thing, right? And that's your job, is to help them implement, and my job is to help them implement. But like, as a player, you need to want to implement, right? Like that's a key, right? Do you find in this day and age with the players that you're working at that it is that a struggle a little bit? Is it, or how do you see it this day and age?
Well, I think that coaching has completely changed since we came through. There's no question about that. I think that I'm sure you have very similar experiences to me with all the different coaches you played for, but it was just different. It was
Yeah.
for me, at least my experiences, it was almost like dictating down, and it's kind of this way or it's you're gone and we're on a highway, and
Yeah.
it just had to be. I had the type of personality I could kind of take that, and I could be motivated by that type of coaching, but it's a different generation now, and these players, they do not respond to that. We in Windsor here, we coach our players. It's a complete partnership. They know that we're all in it together. We're all equal parts. It's not an authoritative figure. These players are not scared of myself as the head coach or any other person on the staff. That's kind of how we try to build our culture here.
Right.
It's so important. We're just kind of supporting each other. They know I'm not perfect. I tell them that all the time. I think back in the day, you thought your coach he knew all, and they acted like they did, but times have changed, and I think that I've seen that as an assistant coach already. Like players will not respond to that anymore. They just kind of go away, and so I take a lot of pride in truly having kind of building relationships basically and open communication, and you have to kind of be real truthful to that. I think that words are cheap, and I think a lot of people say those words in coaching positions or in authoritative roles, but I talk to the players, talk to people that have, whether you're in sport or not. I'm a big believer in that. If you need to be open and feel comfortable, or else you're not going to be successful. So that's kind of the way we run things. And I feel like for the most part, players respond well. I mean, my only issue, I think, with the players is sometimes there's adversity no matter what, because I can't play everybody 20 minutes, and players have to be healthy scratches. That's probably the hardest part about coaching. You have to take them on a lineup, and sometimes those players, that's the biggest challenge for me, is to keep those lower end players on board. But I try my hardest, that's for sure, to do that.
Right. Yeah, no, good for you. And I think, like you said, that authoritative, there wasn't much why back in our day, right? Like no one told you why, they just told you, and you had to figure out a way to get it done. And I think now it's almost expected. And I think it's on both sides of the fence. You mean, like if we were having a coach conversation, I'd be asking, we'd be talking more about, well, how do we get that from everybody, right? Like how do you find that way in? Because that's what we want to be able to do. From the player side, though, it's interesting because what happens if a guy maybe you think doesn't like you? I mean, like, and you don't want to go away and hide, right? Because that's not helping anyone, right? So you have to find a way to find a way, right, with that coach, whoever that is. If that's your goal and your dream, you can't let a bad relationship with a coach at the time ruin whatever it is that you want to have happen. And I think there's some adaptability there, and that's another one of those skill sets that we were talking about. Everyone's doing stick handling and power skating and stuff, but no one's talking about that. You know what I mean? I think those relationships are big. How to manage them, how to get the best out of yourself with the relationship that you're in with the coach. It's true, right? I mean, someone needs to like you to get to the NHL too, unless you're one of those guys, right? Like someone needs to like you. Someone needs to go to bat for you. And that's a relationship thing. That's not a hockey thing, And
I would say here, like at least with here in Windsor, like the players know that, like, we care about them, right? And if a player is on the fourth line, like you said, he's going to know why he's on the fourth line. He's going to keep. And that's a challenge about coaching now. You can't just put a guy on, say, healthy scratch him, and you don't talk to him for a week. Like that just doesn't happen anymore, right? If I healthy scratch someone that wasn't healthy scratch the game before, I have to do my due diligence, and I need to have a reason why I did that. I hold that on myself, and I'll bring that player in, and he's going to know exactly why this is happening to him, and he's going to also have a good idea of how he can get out of that. It's an open communication, So, okay, we're going to show him evidence. We'll probably show him some video. Okay, this is what we see. We also want their feedback, because I think that's an important part of coaching nowadays is not hearing my voice all the time. I want him to tell me. In a perfect world, I want him to tell me why he's out. What his growth areas are, what's he doing well, what can he do better. Okay, well, why? Like, I want him to take over the meeting more so than just me telling him all the information, because a lot of times through my experience coaching, they're just sometimes, yeah, they're listening and I think it was a good meeting, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later they're doing the same thing exactly. So they obviously weren't listening. So I feel like giving him that power to feel comfortable and tell me exactly. And if he doesn't agree with me, that's fine. We can have we can have a conversation. At the end of the day, I have hard decisions to make, and I have to make the decision. But there's definitely a lot of give and take to it.
Sure. And I think you're talking about accountability there as a word for that, right? I mean, you have the conversations. If somebody comes up, like say I'm playing for you and I'm like, hey, I want to be X. And you're like, okay, well, if you want to be X, then you have to do Y. Do you agree with that? And I say yes. And now Y has to get done, right? So there's accountability to the player to get that done, to make that happen, right? To take ownership of that. And without that communication, that it's sort of that gray area. I think a lot of us are left with in our day and age is like, well, what do you actually want me to do? You know, like, I'll do it, right? But please tell me, you know? Maybe let's get back to you and your pro. So first year pro, you go to Springfield. You had your training camp experience. You left there thinking like, holy smokes, I don't belong. I got a long way to go. So now you're going to the AHL, which is not an easy league either. And you have your first year. I looked it up. You're playing with, you mentioned Danny Briere, which to me is really ironic because you guys were both small, skilled centermen in the NHL. I mean, well, from that same NHL draft, Danny comes in. He's a year younger than you. He has a 92-point season. Yeah. You come in, have a 31-point season. I have no idea how the ice time went there or what happened with all that. But I know Shane Doan, I think, was also there. He was down there from the lockout. So now you're trying to get to Phoenix. You already know the guys in Phoenix are great. And now you're sitting here looking at Danny Briere throw up 91 points, and you got Shane Doan in the lineup, and you're like, how many spots are left? Like, what are you thinking that first year when you finish it and as you're going through it?
Yeah, it's probably the hardest year I ever had as a player that year, because just to backpedal a little bit, the year before was almost the best year I ever had in hockey. My numbers were like through the roof in junior. I won the gold medal on the World Junior team, which the biggest thing for that tournament as an individual, it truly put me on the map as being a legitimate prospect for the Coyotes, because I was, on the world. I mean, I was one of the top players in the country. So that was a huge stepping stone for me. So I was feeling really confident about my game. It wasn't my first training camp, because my first training camp had been the year prior, the real eye-opening moment of how far I was away. I felt I got a lot better in my last year of junior. I thought I was really close to being an NHL player, and then all of a sudden that happened. You go into the American League, and that's a great league, and I think the league has continued to it's so good now. It's so close to the NHL, if you can score in that league, usually it translates to the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
I went in there, I was in a tough spot. Danny Briere was a first-round NHL player, very good player. He got everything that he deserved, everything that he was given. But yeah, he was the first-line centerman. We had Chad Kilger was on that team. He was a fourth overall player. They had a veteran that had Rob Murray had played like 15 years pro or something like this. He was the third-line center. Like, I just had, for the first time, like, it's like where you're looking at a depth chart and you're like, where do I fit? I'm a decent player. The coach liked me. I was an honest player, but there was no room for me. Like, I was just kind of trying to find a way to stay in the lineup at that level in the American League. I was a healthy scratch a few games. I think I played 75 games that year out of 80. But still, 5 times I was healthy scratch, which had never happened to me before. My first year pro, I didn't score for 20 games.
Wow.
Probably the hardest time in my hockey career. Like, I was, alone in Springfield, Mass, and I hadn't scored for the first 20 games. And anyone that's been through a slump and played hockey at high levels, like, you feel like you might never score. You know what I mean? And it felt like I might literally never score a professional goal, and finally I got one in my 21st game. I think I had 5 assists at the time, and all of a sudden I got 6 points in 21 games for 1 goal, and I got better as the year went on. But it was a tough year, and it taught me a lot, but I just kind of had to put my head down and just continue to work. And I didn't sulk. I was not a powder. I just came and just kind of put the work boots on and just grinded through it. But that was a challenging year for sure.
Yeah, what is the message there? I mean, like, that's interesting how you even painted that. I mean, you leave June, you're feeling like, hey, I have a chance at the Coyotes, right? Like, you mean, and rightfully so, right? You're feeling good about yourself. You're walking on cloud nine. You don't make that team, and we didn't get into how camp went, but neither here nor there. You go to Springfield. Now you're fighting to even get in the lineup. So, like, what you thought was this close now feels like a million miles away. You might never score a goal. Like, confidence dips at pro level is crazy. And I talk about confidence a lot with the guys that I work with, but like, how did you deal with that? Like, how did you deal with that and still keep that goal in mind that, hey, I want to be an NHLer, you know, like I can be an NHLer, like the belief of that. When you even scored in 20 games at the American League level, I'm sure you're not telling yourself when you go to bed at night, I'm going to play 600 games in the NHL starting in the season, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think thinking back, I think what my mindset was finding a way to contribute just there. I think when I was going through that, I think the NHL thing it was maybe more of a dream rather than a goal, because at that point I was fighting for my life with the Springfield Falcons. You know what I mean? I was trying to find a place there and find a way to contribute and, you know, get in the lineup there. So I think maybe that focus of kept me kind of present and kind of in it every day. And I wasn't necessarily even thinking about Phoenix in those days. I was just trying to find my place on that team. But there was certainly some dark days, you know.
The American League's a grind, man. Like, it's a grind. And I wish the regular hockey fan would understand more just about what goes on there and how that phone call, right? Like that phone call you talked about, like, can instantly change your life. Yeah. And in such a dramatic, like, profound way, like from the bus rides to the OHL, from the 4 and 5 nights, from the pizza on the bus, you know, from towns like Springfield to, you know, New York City and private jets and shrimp. Like, it's insane, the difference, right, in a phone call. And that's a heck of a good league too. But anyway, so you have this experience as a first year. In your second year, you're a point of game guy now, and a lot of those names go away. So Danny's in the show, I think. Like, Donor was back in the show. What else happened there for you to now get the ice time to be the guy on that team?
Well, I think the coaches stayed the same, and so I did build trust with that coaching staff. I think I was a pretty decent player, but there was just no room for me, you know, to play significant minutes. And I think I finished that year strong. Maybe I was on like a half a point a game pace. For the last 50 games, I probably had 25, 30 points in those last 50. So I finished pretty well. So I was going into training camp, not knocking on the door to be an NHL player, but I think a player that when Danny graduated and when Donor graduated, and I'm trying to think, but there were certainly others that moved on as well. I instantly became a pretty significant player, obviously, in Springfield. And I went from being I probably finished my first year pro as a third line player, and I instantly came in as a scoring forward, certainly a top 6 player right from puck drop of the first game. And I played well early, and now I became basically the first line centerman on that team. And arguably that might have been my best hockey season. Everything was going right for me in Springfield. I'm a first line centerman playing on the power play, but also killing penalties and proving that I could kind of play a 200-foot game at that level. That now looking back, Phoenix was obviously loving that development for me as a 7th-round pick.
Right. Yeah. No, that was pretty special, and to make such a big jump there. And I remember playing against you. We did play against each other that year. I was in St. John's, and that was my best year too. Ironically, as far as from a production, I had 68 points in 68 games and 42 goals in the league that year, and had a strong year. And I think this is an interesting point in the road for both of us, because your next camp, you made the show and you never played another game in the minors. And I couldn't make the league again the next year. And I mean, we could debate that for forever. And I don't want it to be about me not. How do you think that worked for you? Like, why do you think that worked for you? And how did that training camp go? And like, how did that progression mean that you were able to leave that league and be an NHLer? Were you ready? Did you know you were ready? Did someone believe in you that you needed to?
Yeah, I think that I didn't know for sure that I was ready. I was hopeful that I was. So it's again, like there's so many good players, and you just, I don't know, I guess the fear of failure and all that, you're never sure. So I certainly didn't go into that training camp thinking I was going to play 82 NHL games that year and have the season that I ended up having. But I think probably the most important thing for me was that I had someone go to bat for me. That was the head coach of the Coyotes, Bobby Francis at the time. My 14-game stint that I had in my second year, we had just a really good relationship. I knew that he really liked me. And I'd have to talk to Bobby now. I haven't really talked to him much since I've been done. I should do that, but I have to guess that he was a guy that really went to bat for me and wanted me to be a part of that team and felt that I was ready to play. And just an interesting coincidence, I don't know if it came up in Danny's conversation, but with Danny Briere, but he was one of my best friends at the time. We were the same age. We played on the World Junior team together. We were drafted the same year. We played in the American League for a year together. They ended up sending Danny down that year. Actually.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I took his spot because I filled a different role on the Coyotes, but I played 82 games in the National Hockey League that year. Danny ended up coming. He got sent down, and I can't remember exactly what ended up happening for him that year. I think he might have been traded that year. I think he got called up a little bit, but I can't remember exactly.
No, he ended up coming back. Yeah, we covered that. He did come back and play with the Coyotes, but he did have that full year. After his 90-point year, and then he came down a year after, and that was your first year. That he did come back, and then we talked about how what changed his perspective and how he ended up making it, which was an awesome story. Boy, I just really enjoyed the conversation with Danny a ton. But yeah, so you think it was a coach, and how did that? So you got called up a little bit the first year and had an experience with the coach in Phoenix, and you felt you had a pretty good relationship.
Yeah. So I played 14 games that year, but there wasn't a chunk of 14. It was like I played one game, then I got sent down, then I played 2 games, and I got sent down. Then I played 3 games over a 12-day span, and then I got sent down. So I played 14, but I was in the National Hockey League for more than 20 days. I was in the National Hockey League for probably 45 days. Yeah. So I got to know the coaches and the players, and I had a few points, and just having that good year in the American League, I knew I was knocking on the door, and I knew I had a good relationship with him, and I think I proved that I could play in a different role. I think with Danny, they had him, he was kind of pigeonholed a bit to play. He was just a one-dimensional player, they felt, whereas with me, I was able to find a way, and that's how I kind of survived as a third or fourth line player, but pretty adaptable as far as where I'm going to play in the lineup. I didn't have, I think that was kind of how I was able to play that many games. Is I never really was the fourth. I never was that prototypical anything, I would say, in the NHL. You know what I mean? Like a good friend of, I know he's a good friend of yours too, but it's a good example, Ryan Johnson, like a friend of mine from Thunder Bay who played 800 games in the National Hockey League. He was a prototypical fourth-line centerman that was a great penalty killer, he was a great face-off guy. He blocked shots. He played 10 minutes a night, great teammate. He was a fourth-line center, and that's why he played. I can't really hang my hat on being a fourth-line center. I played wing. I played center. I played on the fourth line. I played on the third line. I played on the second line sometimes at the NHL level if there was injuries. I was kind of like always a guy that was moving around the lineup, and somehow I carved out a niche of being that guy that you can almost plug in and play anywhere, and I was able to find a way, and Peter made an honest effort as well, but I was never really, and that's why I don't think I ever signed the big contract, and I never had a lot of term on my contracts because no one would commit, okay, this is my third line centerman, we can bring him in for the next 4 years and pay him $12 million. I never got that contract. I was always like year to year, like scratch and claw, find a way to play,
Yeah, no, good for you. That's a testament to get it done. I love that. That's a longevity too. Where do you think, through your time, whether it was in Phoenix or wherever, Was there somebody that had a big influence on you, whether it be a player, like, one of somebody that wore a C on their jersey, or maybe not? Maybe it was just a journeyman that had been around the league for 10 years, or a coach or an assistant coach. Was there somebody that you were like, wow, this really helped me, like, figure things out?
That's a tough. I mean, there's not one guy that sticks out. There's multiple players, I think, on almost every team. Every captain that I played with, I just think the world of. Like Keith Tkachuk was my first captain in Phoenix, and just what a character guy, just a beauty, just a hardworking guy, loved to have fun away from the rink. But I learned so much from that Phoenix group. It was the oldest team in the league. I don't know if Danny shared that, but that team was stock full of veteran players, like kind of legends, like Hall of Fame type players, like Keith Tkachuk, Jeremy Roenick, Rick Tocchet, Sean Burke, Teppo Numminen, Jyrke Lume, guys that played almost 1,000 games. Travis Green was on that team. Like, there's two NHL head coaches now, Greener and Todd.
Yeah.
It was a really interesting group to kind of get my feet wet into the National Hockey League, playing with all those veteran players.
Yeah, that's super cool to be surrounded by that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was like, when I look back on that, and one of the things I noticed looking at your Hockey DB, which what a resource that Hockey DB is to be able to find guys. But you weren't able, like, you had the one playoff series in Vancouver, and other than that, you just weren't on teams that were in the playoffs, right? I mean, and I just found it interesting in my own career, because I never played in a team for a whole season, but the first three teams that I played with, organizations, were teams that weren't doing well. Like, it was Florida. Well, Florida was just there. I mean, they had just got out of the Stanley Cup Finals, so they were doing well at the time, but they still were trying to figure out who they were and what they were all about. And then I got traded to Toronto, who wasn't in the playoffs. They were in one of their long drought kind of scenarios. And then I went to LA, who at the time wasn't doing well, performing well. It was like post-Gretzky era. And then I was with Tampa Bay for a handful, and they were terrible at the time. And I was with the Islanders, got signed with the Islanders. They hadn't been in the playoffs forever. And then the last team that I tried out for, and it was like after I went to Germany and after I went to Japan, was the Red Wings. And then I walked into camp there, and I was like, holy smokes. Like, so this is what it's all about, right? And just the way that the older guys, like, talked with me or talked with the younger guys, or like that, the whole culture there. I know culture is a really ambiguous word, right? It's one of those words that everyone says they have it, or everybody wants it, but nobody knows what it means. Like, when you've got it, you can feel it, and Detroit had it there. And I just mean like Lidstrom, Holmstrom, like these guys, like, made you, Chelios, like, they made you feel a part of something bigger, like that you could contribute. And it was interesting, because not that Matt Sundin wasn't an amazing captain. He was a great guy and a great player, but it was different.
Yeah.
It was just different, like, and I don't know how else to put it, but like, do you, in your time there, did you ever feel like on those teams, like, were you just sort of surviving, or were you thriving, or like, how did that work? Because I just felt such a different environment there when you're in a good environment. Like, it just feels different,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, I'll go through. I played for 4 teams. The Phoenix teams, we were just okay. Veteran players that we weren't ready to win there. And I was so young and so excited and just survival mode. Then I went to Vancouver, and actually we had a real good team in Vancouver, but we were young, but we were good. The year I played, I only played, I think, 6 playoff games, but the team played 2 full rounds, and we lost in Game 7 in the second round to Minnesota. But that was a year that we were one of the best teams in the league. Bertuzzi, Marcus Naslund, Morris, we were good.
Yeah.
I was kind of a real depth player on that team, but that was a team that was kind of special. We were probably good enough to win, but we didn't. But we went to the second round, right to the end of it. Both years we were pretty good there. We lost in the first round at Detroit. One of the years we had a good series against Detroit. But so I played on a good team in Vancouver. Then I went to Columbus, and it was kind of your experiences there and early in your career. We weren't very good, not a playoff team. But then I had the experience of playing in Carolina at the very end for 2 years. And we weren't a playoff team there, but it was a team that had just won the Stanley Cup the year before I joined it. And so they had all those players, for the most part, returning. Rod Brindamore was the captain. Ray Whitney, Glenn Wesley, Brett Hedican,
Right.
players that had worked so long and so hard, and they finally had just won a cup. We actually had a pretty good year. We were one of those teams that had like 93 points and missed the playoffs the following year. We had a pretty good year, but missed the playoffs. But that culture, I'm not going to compare that to the Detroit Red Wings because I've heard so many stories about that, but I can relate to the certain feeling of the room from that leadership group, and it funneled all the way down of the expectation of how you had to handle yourself day to day. When I walked into that Carolina dressing room in August, 2 months after they had just won the Stanley Cup.
Right.
It's different. It's just
Isn't it wild? Like it's completely different. Brad Larson's talked about that, like being with Colorado, like maybe one of the greatest teams ever assembled, right? And being a part of that Joe Sakic, Forsberg, Blake era, right? Foote, like these guys. He's like, it was about winning, period, right? It wasn't about your job. It wasn't about the contract. It wasn't about how many minutes you were getting, right? It was about being part of something bigger than yourself. And so that was this foundation that he came up with, and he ended up going to Atlanta. And it was just, he said it was just, stark contrast and how you could even believe you're in the same league, essentially, right? Like, yeah. And that's interesting. It is interesting. It's maybe for another discussion, but and now as a coach, I'm sure you're trying to create that. And you said you're talking about that culture and that caring and, the standards, right? Standards versus expectations. And that's interesting too. But when you look back on a guy like, I don't know, you said Tkachuk, or you said, like a Ray or a Brind'Amour. Like Brind'Amour is like this prototypical, like now he is a coach, right, and doing his thing there, and he's takes care of himself. He seems like the ultimate high performance type person, right? Like he's always trying to get better. Like any takeaways from him? Like how did he go about his business, that guy?
He was just so respected, and he's not like a real loud guy. I wouldn't say he's quiet, but he's just, when he spoke, there was so much respect for what he was saying, and it was just the way his habits and the things that he did on a daily basis. It just blew me away. And like I had read before I played with him, I knew the stories. I heard about like how hard he would train and things like that. But it's one of those things where until you actually see this man doing it on a daily basis, you can't even believe it. You know what I mean? Like there's one thing I tell this story to my players. I've told my players this story, but there was a night I remember in Carolina where the game was over and we had a tough stretch of games where we played like 6 games in 10 or 11 days, and we finally were getting a day off, and we were at home and we were all going out for a team dinner. We're bringing the girlfriends, the wives, and we were going to kind of have a nice party right after the game, a home game. And I think we still did a flush ride because that was part of the culture there. It was very hard working with all those veterans. So we did do like a little circuit or something, but I was one of the last guys to leave. I had my suit ready or whatever. I'm ready to go. And I remember walking past the gym, and Roddy was still in the gym, and he was doing like 3 plates aside, like doing squats. And he was like not even close to leaving the rink. You know what I mean? And he's just training so hard at that moment. This is a player that was near the end of his career. He was in his late 30s. He was on a 5-year deal at like 3.5 a year, and he had the career that he had, but yet I don't know exactly what pushes that person to be so relentless with his work, but it's a great story. Like I would say everyone to a man on that team is almost like a high performer. Like they're working, but yet this guy is like a different echelon.
Sure.
Like this guy is just pushing it to extremes that it's hard for a regular person to comprehend. I mean,
yeah.
That relentlessness that he was bringing, and it's just, he's bringing it every day. He's not telling you about it. He's not boasting about it. He's not telling anybody, probably including his wife or his parents, that he's there, but he's just coming in every day, and he's bringing the same attitude to the team, and it's just so contagious. He doesn't have to say a word.
Right.
It's just, you feel it as a person on that team. Like you see Rod Brind'Amour doing it, he doesn't have to say a word to me. I need to do it. too, you know, or else.
Well, don't you? Right? I mean, that's the thing. And what do you do as a young guy when you think you're supposed to go out and you're thinking about how many beers you're going to have and where they're at, right? And he's still in the gym, right? And you're like, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if that isn't an awesome example, and that's what I love those stories, and geez, and if young guys can just model that now, right? Like in some way, shape, or form, because that's the other thing about leveling up. And I talk to my guys about whatever level you want to get to, whether that's the OHL or that next step, whether that's Springfield for you, and then to the NHL. Like every time you make that step, there's a different requirement.
Yeah.
Right? There's a different level that you need to get to, because what you did to get there was only good enough to get you there. Now you have to find a way to stay there, right? And you were talking about adaptability, and that's when you have those examples, or you have somebody like yourself that's been there that can share the stories. You still need to learn it on your own, but it's really helpful to understand, right? Like, because you have to raise your own expectation level, because what you've done so far isn't good enough.
It is, and I think that what I learned playing in the NHL for that long, and from Rod and different players, I played with Adam Foote as well, and I think the world of him, like just the leadership. But I think the biggest thing for young players is they have a hard time handling success, and they have a hard time handling adversity as well. But I feel like, just to give you an example, motivating my team after we've lost, I find is easier than motivating them after we've won. You know what I mean? Like I feel like greatness is so hard, because they can get so complacent so easily. I find young players, you know what I mean? And to be truly great and to be an NHL player, to be the Rod Brindamores of the world, there's no complacency after success, because they keep doing things well, but they just keep doing it again and again. And, you know, like if we've lost 5, or even for me as a coach, I hate when we have an opposing team, they're on a 3-game trip. I hate that they just lost the night before. You know, I want them to win in London or win in Saginaw before they come to Windsor, because I feel we have a mental edge on a junior team that just, I want them to win. I want, you know, so they're feeling, they get complacent, and then we can put the hammer down. And I feel it's my biggest challenge as a coach is when we've won 3 or 4 in a row, how can we win 5? How can we win 6? Because if we've lost 3 in a row, I know there's going to be a pushback. I know we can jolt them, we can get them going, but we're constantly trying to truly be consistent every single day, whether we've won, whether we've lost, whether we're playing at home, whether we're playing on the road. Here we go again. We're the Windsor Spitfires, and we're starting from scratch, and we're going to come and we're going to be try and play to our identity every single day.
Right.
It's a challenge.
That's so awesome, man. I'm smiling on the inside while I am on the outside right now, because like what you just said there, like, and I'm coaching my son, my oldest son, who's 10 years old, right? So he's on the best team Vernon has, right? So it's the Adam A team here. And this group of kids that I'm coaching are like, they're good. Like they really are good. And I think we're 14-1 to start the season, and we're kind of mowing over people. And what you just, like, we had practice yesterday, and I said, guys, we got a problem. And I'm like, what do you think the problem is? And guys are guessing. And I'm like, we're good. We're really good. And I'm like, you know why that's a problem? And anyways, we got into this conversation. It's just what you're saying. I said, for us to be great, we don't have anyone to chase right now. Yeah. Everyone's trying to get better, because we've set the bar, and the bar is us. So they know where they can get to, and we don't have anyone to chase. So we have to chase each other. And I'm like, being great's hard. Being good's easy. Yeah. Right. And that's kind of the Rod Brindamore thing too, right? Like Rod Brindamore had just a standard of doing things. And when you can develop that as a player, as an individual, and then bring that together as a team, yes, right? Like now you're onto something, right? Like where everyone believes that there's another level. There's always got to be somewhere else to get to. And I think it's fun. Like I'm having conversations with these guys. I tell them all the time, I'm like, you guys, I'm treating you guys like junior players. And because I think I can, because the way to think about stuff, it doesn't start at 7, 8, 9, or 15. Like it start whenever, right? And then it's going to treat you.
That's so true.
So it's super fun. It's super fun. And just to be a part of that. I know how much juice you must get out of coaching those guys at that level. I get a ton of fun out of it just doing it here on the minor youth level. It's really great to have an impact and to see guys kind of when the lights go on, right? And they start having some success. Yeah. I did have down here in my notes culture, and I think we talked about that enough, but I do think it's an interesting thing. And from a coach perspective, you're trying to build it, but like that's one thing I got from Babs as just developing. And what I try to talk to the guys I work with about is developing an individual culture, like an individual identity. Because I felt Babs had that. I thought that he he wakes up in the morning, I truly believe, and he's trying to get better.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to get his team better, but I think he's trying to get himself individually better. Like, I think that's just sort of like how he's wired, and he's whether that's how he's wired or how he grew into that process. But you as a coach now, like, I think you had to have that as a player. Like you said, you gain these different skill sets. You were adaptable. You could do these things. Like, do you try and do that in your day? Like, do you try to be a better coach? And if so, like, how do you go about that process of improvement?
Yeah, like for me, I try to reset every day and really challenge myself to truly try to get better. And I know that everybody's saying it, but it's easier said than done. You really need to challenge yourself to continue to get better as an individual, whether you're a player or you're a coach. Like for me, for our team to get better, how are we going to find a way? And I challenge our coaching staff here in Windsor, like, how are we going to make our team better today? Like, we can't just do the same practice that we did last week and recycle it and let's just get through the day because we don't play till Saturday. And that mindset you're just going to go away. We're coming in the morning and we're excited about kind of brainstorming, watching some film or whatever and seeing, okay, where are we struggling? Where are we good? And really identifying it and then translating into a practice or coaching a player up basically and finding a way to make that player better, whether that's on the ice or off of it with a meeting, with video, with an off-ice workout, but truly putting time in as a complete staff and preparation in the fact that we can find a way to make our team better. As far as our players go, yeah, the culture thing, like for me, I always tell them, like, what is your mindset for the day? Like, culture to me is like, how does a player, like when he wakes up in the morning, because I'm sure you had it, Podsy, as a player. I certainly did at times. I had it when I was in Russia. But like there was days for me, a lot of days actually, if I'm being honest, as a player where I was waking up and I was not excited to go to the rink. I was actually dreading going to the rink. I was just, here we go. Like, I want to just get through the day. There was a lot of days like that for me. And because of the organization's culture and because of the coaching, I would probably blame it on more than anything else. And for me, it's a constant communication with the players, but I want I ask them this all the time. How are you feeling? I want my players in Windsor, when they wake up, I want them to be excited to come to the rink. And if we have that, then I think that's a huge first step in creating something special here. Because if we have players that are moping in here and just dreading it, and they think it's going to be, oh, here we go again, oh, it's going to be a negative, or what, like, you're not going to move forward. I want every single player to truly feel that, and I know it's not going to happen every day for every player, because what we've talked about, and someone might have been healthy scratch, and I can understand those circumstances, but for the most part, I want my players like excited to come to the rink and be around their teammates and their coaches and their trainers and really have a good experience for the day. I truly feel that just that mindset alone can help make them better.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a good segue. I know I'll be sensitive to time here. We got about maybe 5-10 minutes left. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So I'll wrap up with a few more questions. But I think that's a good segue. Like, you're talking about enthusiasm, right? You're talking about being interested, right? Being excited. Do you think, is that a good way for players to get noticed? And that's part of the second part of the question, which is like training camp. We're out of you're a month out of training camp now, but you just did have training camp. Guys at the youth level have just kind of been cut from teams or whatever, and parents or what is like, how do I get noticed by a guy like Trevor Letowski, right? Like, what do I do? And I talk about things like that. I talk about being enthusiastic. I talk about being attentive. I talk about being professional, right? Being early, staying late. Like, those are cliche a little bit, but if you're doing that with intention, you're going to get noticed, because it's not everybody's doing it, And when you talk about culture, I mean, I know for me, like, I love that kid in the room that's got a big smile on his face, right? It's ready to go, right? He's enjoying being there. Like, I want him on my team, right? Like, I don't care maybe if he's still got a little less hands than somebody else, right? If that guy's a spark plug, he's ready to go and he's making our room better, like, to me, that makes a big difference. Like, would you encourage guys to come out of their shell a little bit and to embrace that enthusiasm?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I agree with you, Pods. I love that player as well, but I'm also, everyone's got a different personality, right? And there's players on our team that are introverts and they don't say a lot. So I think you really, as a coach, at least, you need to get to know the player. You need to get to know each and every one of them. But I think a very, like, less is more sometimes. It's for, like, there's some players, like, you can kind of, when you've been coaching a while, you can kind of see right through them, you know, like there's a phoniness to a
Yeah.
lot of players
Yeah.
that kind of drives me a little bit crazy. Like, I want the player that he has like almost, I appreciate the quiet energy. Like, I think at our level, coaches at our level, at least, I think that's a challenge for us, but we need to identify that player that is just continuing to punch we're aware that he's in the gym. We're aware that he's the first player. Because some coaches, I would say, they're not doing their homework. They don't know that, you know. I want to know everything about our players. I'm talking to our strength coach every day, seeing how the workouts are going. I'm seeing them in the practice sessions, and you get so many viewings and you're around them so much that you see it. You see the consistency, and maybe he's not the loudest kid in the room, but there's an energy to his work that it comes out, that consistency, you know, that I think that players, sometimes they can try to do too much, and that can maybe set them back. They have there's a fakeness to their energy, and they're trying to, like, almost like that, the kid that's always, oh, coach, what do you think of this? Oh, what do you think? Like, sometimes you can go a little bit overboard with that too, and sometimes just a lot of times when my players are going to pro camps, it's like the advice I give them is like, that work ethic that doesn't go unnoticed, you know. Like, make sure with everything that you're doing, you are a hardworking player, and I think that everyone says they're hardworking, you know, and I think that's a great thing for young players too. I always talk to my team in one of my first meetings I have. Like, in the summertime, I call every single player to see how their workouts are going. And every single player, to a man, tells me that they're having the best summer that they've ever had, and that they're the hardest. It's the hardest they've ever worked and all this. And then they come to training camp, and the guy that told me he's the hardest working guy is like 40th out of 60 in the fitness testing. Like, they don't really, some of them don't know how it is to truly be the hardest working player. You know, it's, I don't know, it's almost, it's an intangible that's like just so valuable to me. That true work ethic every single day.
I understand. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's authenticity with who you are as a player, right? And I personally struggle with that, because as much I was the guy in the room, or tried to be the guy in the room that would get guys laughing and stuff, like I was more of an introvert. Like, I wasn't, it was hard for me to get comfortable in that environment. And I wasn't the guy that would want to go and do the work, the weight workout in front of the coach's office, just because I knew it was in front of the coach's office.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so I would do a lot of stuff that no one would ever see. I was like, if I do my business on the ice, that's what I want. Like, so I come at this from a little different angle, right? Because like, there is such a difference, because everyone is wired different. Somebody wants to be first in line with their hand up. Some guys are hiding in the corner, right? But everyone wants the same thing. And it's like, how do you get across that fact that you want to be a pro and that you're prepared to do the things that are being a pro, right? And it takes that coach to understand you, but it also takes, I think there's got to be some ownership from the player to build that relationship too, right? To let that coach know somehow authentically, right, that they're in it to do the business, right? That they're in it to do the work. Because like I said, you don't want somebody to be fake about it. I mean, you're going to see through that right away, right? And also the proof in the pudding is whether you're going to do the action or not. Anyone can talk a good game. Every guy in the world's going to interview well. I guarantee you.
Yes.
Right? Question is, what happens 2 weeks after that meeting, right? What are they doing then?
And you know what I would add to that point? Like, the game has become so detailed, and with the technology, that even in the junior hockey, the coaches, there's so much video and analytics and basically the evaluation of a player, there's so much feedback. Like, it's like there's nowhere to hide. You know what I mean? Like, even in our practices, we can take the practice sometimes and evaluate, and so you can't really hide. You know what I mean? Like, the talk is cheap, like you say. Every player is saying the right thing when you're one-on-one with the player, especially the player and the head coach. You know, but how does the player, like, show me on the ice? You know, show me how you're treating the trainer, not me. I know you're going to be nice to me. Like, stupid, right? Like they're going to be nice to the head coach, right? But are they going to be nice to the guy that was holding the door on the way into the rink? Are you going to be a good person at school? Make some friends at school, like outside of hockey, which I think is so important. Like not your hockey guys, you play for Windsor Spitfires doesn't make you better than someone else. You know what I mean? That's the type of player we want. But like at the end of the day, we have video, we have so much access to, like if they're not doing their job, if they're not playing the right way, their habits aren't right, we can show them. Like it's kind of black and white, where I don't think as players we didn't have that luxury coming up through junior, where you know the coach might not play as much, but like there wasn't communication, there wasn't feedback of why, there wasn't evidence of why with actual video clips showing you, and that's why I think the game is continuing to evolve. The players are better than they've ever been, and next year they'll probably be even better because the game's evolving and there's so many different things that make the players better.
No, I hear you, and we'll conclude that little segment with I think there's still room for good guys. You know, like, and I think there's a testament to you there. Like you said, you didn't really have a role, you didn't really have a niche, but you're not going to play 600 games if you're an asshole. Plain and simple. You know what I mean? Like it's a team game at the end of the day, and it's about relationships. And if you can be a good human and have good human traits, I mean, that's going to do a lot because the locker room matters, right? Like I think some guys forget that. They think it's all about what my plus was, what my minus was. You got to be a good guy, right? You got to be a good guy. You got to be somebody that people want to be around, and that helps.
That's a great point. And I think when you look at management and coaches, a lot of them are former players, and they're all human. Whether they're former players or not, they want to be able to trust their employee. They want to trust their players, right? So I think that if you have a reputation of being a good teammate, being a good person, it takes you further than maybe you even know, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I got two questions here. From people that are following me. So I said that I was going to be interviewing you today, and I said, you know, if you were to have him on the other side of, you know, the interview, what do parents want to know, or what do players want to know? And I had two real good questions that I thought were relevant. And one was from a lady named Diane Migra. Sounds like she's from maybe the Ontario area, and she said, what if you don't get drafted or get cut, even say from an OHL team, and now you're on a junior B team? First of all, she's wondering, can they ever get to the OHL? Is it possible? And how is it possible? I will depart from that quickly. And I looked at your roster, and I was actually shocked, quite honestly, that everyone on your team was drafted by Windsor. Which I don't think, I mean, I didn't do a whole cross section of the league, but I do know there is room for guys who haven't been drafted in the Bantam draft to make major junior. I know it happens a lot. It doesn't seem like it happened with you guys this year, but what is your answer to that? Like, is junior B okay? Can you get found in junior B? And if so, like, what would you say to those players?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think that we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but like as a 16-year-old, you're just so young and you're so far from being the best player that you can be at 16. If you're going to peak at 24 years old and you can find a way to truly get better every single year, you can certainly push the envelope and become an OHL player and then become an NHL player. I think that it's been proven in the past. Are the odds against you? Sure they are. But it can happen. Become a very good player at the level that you're at, and then you're going to be recognized and you're going to be knocking at the door to get to the next level. If we don't draft a player, there's players every year that they don't get drafted. All of a sudden they're junior B players. And if they establish themselves as good junior B players, they're probably going to get invited to a camp and they're going to be knocking on the door. Do they make our team right away? That's pretty hard to do. But then now we know them. Now they're going to go back to junior B again. All of a sudden they're the best player again, and they're just pushing the envelope and just kind of pushing the door open and not going away. I think my advice is, well, there's a lot of kids, whether they weren't drafted, even if they were drafted, but they get any adversity at all, and they think it's the end of the world. Like, I think they need to look at it in the bigger picture. Look at it, I would say to that parent, that 16-year-old, they have so many years ahead of them to develop to become the best player they can possibly be. And that's just one setback if they went through the draft. But if they're truly good enough and they're pushing each year, like, people will see them. They'll
Yeah.
find a way somehow, because especially now, the evolution of the game, every game's on TV. Our scouts are watching games on TV as much as they are live, even at the
Right. I know, it's crazy. And you got to dominate, right? That's what I tell my guys, at least. I mean, like, dominate the level you're at. I mean, even if you think you're not supposed to be there, then prove that you're not supposed to be there. Dominate it, right? And you're going to get noticed, right? Like, treat that league like you're Peter Forsberg, right? Like, you're that guy, right? Like, and be Rob Brindamore. Show up early, stay late, get better there, right? And I think if you can put that type of work ethic, like you said, into where you want to go, someone's going to find you, because coaches want guys like that, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is too, which I think guys forget about, and I didn't know at the time, is that guys like you help the guys that are on your team. You're going to have, like, you want to go to bat for those guys. There's guys that you trust. There's guys that you respect, that when that phone rings, you're like, yeah, this guy's your guy, right? Like, he's your guy, draft him or do whatever. And that same coach in junior B is getting those calls from guys like you. Hey, what's so-and-so like?
Exactly.
Right. That coach, if that coach knows that you're putting in the time, putting in the work, and he wants to vouch for you, man, that makes all the difference in the world.
It's so true. And I think it's a great point, especially for all young players, as far as respecting their coach and being a good teammate. Like, I think the best scouts are the scouts that talk to the coaches, because you're crazy. Like, if I was ever a scout, I don't think it's in my makeup, but if I was ever a scout, my first phone call every single time is to the coach. I mean, the coach knows the player so much better than any scout could ever know him. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to tell me that you come and watch my player. I don't care who you are. You can be a general manager of the National Hockey League level. You see my player play 5 times. Okay? I've seen my player play 68 times, and I've also seen him practice 100 times, and I've seen him work out 60 times. This player.
Right.
I know him. So ask me about him, you know. And for the most part, I think the coach is, at least I'm going to be honest too, and I tell my players that all the time. Like, I'm not going to lie for you. You know what I mean? Like, I have to be honest, or else I lose my credibility with the person asking me. So I think I'm very true to that. Like, if it's a player that has not been a good teammate, has not been doing the things we asked, then if the scout asks me, like, I'm not going to sue the player per se, but I'm certainly not going to promote him. And if he's not doing the things right on a daily level, I think that can funnel all the way down to whatever level.
Right.
You need to have the coach in your own, like, earn the coach's trust. Like, at the end of the day, the coach wants the best for you. He wants the best for the team. If you're doing the right things, if you're a good player, like, he's not going to screw you just to screw you. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a reason.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I think that's you hit the nail on the head there, because what you're doing. I mean, you're not gonna vouch for somebody that you don't want to vouch for, right? Because it is you, and it's what you've built. So I mean, if you keep promoting guys that aren't promotable, right? Like, that doesn't look good on you. So I mean, that's the authenticity again, right? Be real, and you're gonna get a real answer. And I agree with you. I'd be calling the coach too. You know better than anyone else, and it's all those intangibles that you know that you maybe don't see on the ice in those 5 games, right? What is the resiliency like? How do they handle adversity, right? What are they like away from the rink? What type of teammate are they? I mean, all those things that matter so much. So cool. So that was from Diane Megron. The last one here, Lutz, is from Gordon Sitter. His son actually plays on my team, and it's a great question. He said, when kids are 16, 17 years old and breaking into the WHL, OHL, or Q, are they better playing 20 minutes a night at a lower level, or be with the big club playing 10 minutes a night against better competition? How would you answer that, if there is an answer? I know it's pretty nuanced, and it probably depends on the team and the player, but if you could do your best to give an answer to that, what do you think if it was your son?
That's a great question. My first instinct, my first hand, I think, would be probably to play in the Western Hockey League or in the Ontario Hockey League or whatever major junior, play at the highest level possible. I think that, especially now, the way that the programs are run, I mean, it's like a full-time hockey here, you know, whereas in with our affiliate, that's not, like, they don't have full-time coaches. They don't practice every single day. So the whole environment is different at the higher level. You know, like, we have a strength and conditioning coach that is paid to provide a workout that is the best possible workout for the player on that specific day. And the coaches have spent all day preparing the practice and preparing video to make the player better, and then to get out in the practice, and we have skill development coach, and we have a skating coach, and we have access to all these different kind of people that maybe the lower level, he's going to get more minutes in the game, and that there's certainly an argument to that, because at the end of the day, I think that's very valuable to be in game situations and to be succeeding, and you need ice time, no question. But at the end of the day, if I had to answer it, I think a player can develop just fine if he's playing limited minutes in the game, as long as he's getting everything else. If he's practicing at that high level, you remember, Podsy, when you first got called up to the NHL, and the pace of that practice is just faster. It makes you better. It makes you pass the puck better the higher the level, even in the practice sessions.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah, I think that's huge. Yeah, and I think also what we just talked about previously, like you can go to that lower level, and again, there's going to be variations to what we're saying here, but the relationship you're also building with that coach, right? Like while you're there. So, I mean, you might be playing 10 minutes a night, but that you're going to be probably in a better situation that next year, like you were, where you come now in, the coach knows you, some older guys leave, and now you're filling this spot, and you're not having to build that trust and build that scenario of coming in from this other organization. So I think there's a lot to be said for that as well.
Yes, and to finish, I would like to say this too, like the London Knights in our league, they have, it's arguably the best program in Canada. They continue to win, and they draft so well, and they have so many high-end players, but they continue to, like, if you look at it, they have 16-year-olds that they actually keep in London all year. And almost consistently, they don't do anything as a 16-year-old. Like, they barely even get in the lineup, but they are actually on the London Knights. And they might play 30 games, and they have, like, 3 points.
Yeah.
You know? Honestly, if you look back, I wish I had a few names. Like even we have Jean-Luc Foudy on our team. He's a player that might get drafted in the first round. His brother, the Foudy, I can't remember his first name right now, but he plays for the London Knights. He was drafted in the first round for the Columbus Blue Jackets 2 years ago. He might play on the World Junior team this year. But as a 16-year-old in the OHL, he had like 8 points in like 40 games. Like he didn't even play. Like all of a sudden, the very next year was his NHL draft year, and he just goes off. He ends up scoring 50 points, and he's a first-round pick in the National Hockey League. There's a good for my argument. Like, how do you argue that? But he's been developed the right way. He wasn't in game situations, but each and every day he was challenged. He was practicing with great players every day, and he developed, and he was ready when the time came the following year to be a great player. And I think the London Knights are a great example of it. They continue to do that almost every single year.
Yeah, that's great. If you got that culture too, because then you give yourself the time to mentally feel like you're ready and that you belong too. It's interesting because, like, you know, even coming from that other league, like say you did play the 20 minutes and you had success there, you still haven't played in the WHL yet, or you still haven't played in the OHL yet. And that's a level up. So you have to go through that whole mental side of things. Whereas as a 16-year-old, you're the whole time you're just absorbing it, you're metabolizing it, you believe it more, even if you've only had a few games, right? You've been there. So I think you're still at an advantage. So.
Yeah, for sure.
I would agree with you. Well, Lutz, I appreciate your time. This was awesome. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I know the people here listening will too. A lot of good stuff from you. And I didn't really mention it, right? You guys are crushing it. I mean, congratulations. You're obviously doing something great there. First place right now, and you're at a little streak rolling, like you said, so keep protecting that winning streak.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, we got a great young team here. We've had a really young team the last couple of years. We won the Memorial Cup a couple of years ago there, and we kind of rebuilt it. And now we have a group that's getting close to being real good, and they're just a fun group to coach. I'm enjoying every day here. So
that's awesome.
Ozzy, this flew by, so it's awesome.
I know, it's crazy. You start talking hockey, it's just like, what time is it? No, it's perfect. No, thanks again, man. We'll catch up here after this. I'll let you know when we're going to release it. And awesome, man. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks, Luke. Okay, cheers.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Having that conversation with Trevor was, I expected it to be good, but it was really even better than I even expected. Trevor's authenticity, his relatability, that was almost like palpable. You could feel it, that he cares. He cares about the guys that are playing for him. He cares about his coaching staff. He wants people to get better, and he wants to get better himself. And when you come at life with that approach, boy, it's not hard to tell why he's successful, why his team's having such a great season, and why he's so highly respected within the game and at what he does. So the fact that we were able to listen to him for 90 minutes and to hear his story, his own personal story about becoming a hockey player and a 600-game NHL veteran, and also now his experiences behind the bench and how he's grown into that role and how he's evolved to be the coach that he's become today, I think we should all just be grateful and thank him for his time, because that's what this is all about, is about people in his position that have been through the wars themselves, that are now able to pass along this knowledge to the players who want to be the best versions of themselves today. So we have more episodes coming up. Obviously, this podcast is just getting started, and it's with the support of people like you that are talking about it, that are telling me how much they appreciate it and sharing it with others, that really makes this thing grow and becomes something special. So stay tuned for more great guests. I'm really humbled at the quality of guests I'm able to have on this show, and I'm also humbled by how many people are choosing to listen and use their time to listen to the stories and the content that my guests have to share. So make it a great week until we hear you next time here at Up My Hockey. Cheers.